I've seen plenty in these woods. Blood on the leaves, broken bodies, the silent, staring eyes of something that didn't make it. But that morning, when I spotted the tracks, something made me stop. At first, I thought it was just another animal moving through the damp earth. Then I got closer. The prints were small, too small for an adult. They weaved in a messy pattern, like something young and inexperienced, unsure of where to go. A bear cub, alone. I knelt beside the tracks, brushing my fingers against the indentations in the dirt. They weren't fresh, maybe a few hours old. The thing had been wandering without direction. That wasn't normal. Cubs don't just wander, not unless something happened to their mother. I stood up, scanning the trees. The forest was quiet in that eerie way that only deep woods could bring. No birds, no movement, nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then I saw them, 100 yards off, just at the edge of the trees. Shadows moved. Low, silent. Too many for it to be a mistake. I pulled my rifle off my shoulder, keeping it low but ready. I didn't need to raise it to know what I was looking at. Wolves. They weren't running. Not yet. But they were moving with purpose. Their bodies sleek and low, cutting through the underbrush with practiced ease. A pack moving as one, circling something. I followed their direction, my eyes scanning the dense foliage ahead of me. And then I spotted it. A small lump of fur, barely visible against the fallen leaves. It was moving, slow and clumsy, struggling through the undergrowth. The cub. It wasn't dead yet, but it would be soon. I exhaled slowly, my breath steady in the humid air. Wolves don't waste time. They don't hesitate. If they were stalking, it meant one of two things. They were toying with it, or they were waiting for the right moment to strike. My finger hovered near the trigger. I wasn't here to save animals. Nature had its way. The strong survived. The weak didn't. That's just how it worked. I knew that better than anyone. But something about the way that cub moved, something about how it fought to stay up, even as the thick vines and roots tangled around its little legs, made me pause. The wolves were closing in, and I had to decide what I was going to do. The cub had no idea it was being hunted. It stumbled through the snow, exhausted, its tiny paws sinking deep with every clumsy step. It was moving toward the trees, maybe thinking it could find shelter, but there was no way it would make it in time. Not with them closing in. The wolves weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They moved in that quiet, controlled way that only seasoned hunters did, their formation tightening, cutting off escape routes without a single wasted motion. They were doing what nature taught them, what instinct commanded them to do. I stayed still, rifle ready but lowered. My breath was slow, measured. I wasn't a fool. A single shot could scatter them, but it wouldn't change the outcome. The cub was too weak to run, too small to fight. It would end the moment the wolves decided it should. The lead wolf, bigger than the others, took a few steps closer. His fur was thick and dark. His eyes locked on the cub with the kind of focus that sent shivers through even seasoned men. He didn't need to snarl, didn't need to lunge. The pack was waiting for his signal. The cub stopped. Maybe it sensed them now. Maybe it just couldn't go any further. It turned its head slightly, sniffing the air, and let out a weak, tired whimper. The lead wolf tensed. I exhaled. My finger brushed against the trigger. I could fire a warning shot. That would send them running for now. But it wouldn't save the cub. It would only delay the inevitable. And maybe that was the right thing to do. Maybe it wasn't my place to interfere. But I knew one thing. That little ball of fur standing in the snow wasn't ready to die. Not yet. The wolf took another step, and I made my choice. The moment the lead wolf moved, the others followed. It was like watching a wave crash forward. Silent, controlled, inevitable. They surged toward the cub, a wall of muscle and hunger, ready to end this in a single coordinated strike. But the cub didn't just collapse. It turned, clumsy but desperate, and let out a high-pitched growl. More fear than threat, but enough to make me tighten my grip on the rifle. It swiped a tiny paw at the nearest wolf, barely grazing its snout. The wolf flinched, hesitated just for a second. It wasn't expecting a fight. That second was all it took. The cub lunged forward, not away, but into the chaos. Instinct, a last, wild attempt to survive. Its jaws clamped down on the leg of a smaller wolf, a sharp yelp cutting through the cold air. Blood hit the snow. The wounded wolf stumbled back, shaking its leg, and the rest of the pack hesitated. It wasn't much of a wound, just a scratch in the grand scheme of things, but it changed something. The moment stretched longer than it should have. The lead wolf stopped. He looked at the injured one, then back at the cub. His ears flattened. The air between them shifted. The kill no longer a simple, mindless hunt. And still, I didn't fire. I could have ended it right there. One shot and the wolves would scatter. But then what? The cub would still be alone. Still be dying, just slower. My breath came out in slow, measured puffs. The pack hadn't decided yet. They were recalculating, reassessing. I could feel it, and I had no idea which way this was going to go. The cub let go of the injured wolf's leg and stumbled backward. It was panting, exhausted, swaying on its feet, but still standing. The lead wolf stepped closer. I raised my rifle, aiming not to kill but just to remind them I was there. The snow was stained red, and the hunt was no longer as simple as it should have been. Something was wrong. The wolves had the advantage. They should have ended it right then. The cub was weak, bleeding, barely standing. And yet, the pack didn't move. They weren't scared of me. I was too far, my rifle just a distant threat. No, something else held them back. Their bodies tensed, ears flicking, eyes darting between each other and the cub, as if they were waiting for a command that never came. The injured wolf limped away from the group, licking its wound. It growled low, uncertain, like it wasn't just hurt, but insulted. And then I saw it. The lead wolf wasn't looking at the cub anymore. He was watching his own pack. His stance had shifted, no longer just the poised readiness of a hunter, but something else. Caution, maybe even hesitation. His ears flicked backward, his body angling just slightly to the side. And then it clicked. This wasn't just a hunt. This was a test. The pack wasn't just here to kill. They were here to prove something. To him, to each other. The cub had fought back. Not well, not enough to truly matter, but enough to disrupt the natural order. And in that tiny, bloody act of resistance, the cub had done something unexpected. It had made them doubt. Wolves don't hesitate unless something is wrong. The air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. I could hear their low growls, the barely restrained energy of a pack that should be tearing flesh but instead stood frozen in the cold. I gripped my rifle tighter. The lead wolf took a slow step forward, not toward the cub, but toward his own kind. And for the first time, I wasn't sure who the real threat was. The pack was waiting for the lead wolf to strike. One signal and it would be over. But then, something happened that I didn't expect, that none of us expected. One of the wolves stepped between the cub and the rest of the pack. Not lunging, not attacking, just standing there. A barrier. At first, I thought it was a mistake, just a shift in position. But then it growled, low and deliberate. And it wasn't directed at the cub. It was aimed at its own kind. The other wolves hesitated, ears flicking back in confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. There was a natural order to things, a way these hunts played out. But now, one of their own was breaking the pattern. The lead wolf lowered his head, eyes narrowing at the one standing in defiance. The tension was thick, charged with something ancient, something primal. I had seen this kind of standoff before, not between predator and prey, but between rivals, between those who had something to prove. The cub was forgotten for a moment. It swayed on its feet, barely holding itself up, but it wasn't the focus anymore. Now the fight wasn't about it. Now the fight was about control. I adjusted my grip on the rifle, my pulse steady but my instincts screaming. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The wolf that had stepped forward, he wasn't the biggest, nor the strongest, but he stood firm. His growl deepened, and the pack shifted uneasily. The lead wolf didn't move. For the first time since this started, I wondered if I was about to witness something even more brutal than a simple hunt. And I wondered who, in the end, would survive. The first attack wasn't loud. It wasn't a snarl or a warning growl. It was a blur of movement, fast and vicious. The lead wolf lunged at the one who had dared to challenge him. Their bodies collided, a flurry of snapping jaws and slashing claws, kicking up a spray of snow. The rest of the pack tensed, watching, waiting. This wasn't just about a meal anymore. This was about power. The cub, forgotten for the moment, sank into the snow, its small body trembling. It had no idea what was happening, only that death had been momentarily postponed. I knew better than to move. A shift in position, the wrong noise, anything could redirect that fury toward me. So I watched, rifle ready but useless. This wasn't my fight. The two wolves fought brutally. The challenger wasn't the strongest, but he was fast, smart. He ducked and dodged, avoiding the worst of the lead wolf's teeth, waiting for an opening. The pack watched in tense silence. Some of them seemed torn, uncertain about who they should follow if the fight dragged on too long. And then the opening came. The challenger twisted sharply, snapping his jaws around the lead wolf's ear and tearing it open. A sharp yelp echoed through the cold air. Blood splattered against the white snow. The lead wolf staggered back, panting, wounded. His authority cracked just for a second. And that second was all it took. One of the other wolves moved. Then another. They weren't attacking the cub anymore. They were deciding where they stood. And I could see it happening. The pack was splitting. Some stayed back, loyal to their wounded leader. Others inched toward the challenger, ears flat, tails twitching. No one wanted to make the first move, not yet. But the damage was done. This wasn't a hunt anymore. This was a war for dominance. And in the middle of it all, the cub lay curled in the snow, alive. For now. The fight dragged on, brutal and merciless. The wolves snapped and tore at each other, their growls echoing through the trees, filling the cold air with the scent of blood. The pack had broken. There was no order anymore, no unity, just chaos and hunger. And in that chaos, the cub found its chance. I saw it move, slowly at first, hesitating, as if it wasn't sure whether it was truly invisible now. Then instinct kicked in. It turned, forcing its legs to carry it away from the mess of snarling bodies, away from death. I held my breath, gripping the rifle, tracking every clumsy step. The cub was exhausted, barely holding itself up, but it was moving. It was going to make it, but fate wasn't done playing games. It only got a few yards before its legs buckled, collapsed into the snow, panting hard, sides heaving. His body trembled with the effort, but it didn't get back up. Not this time. I cursed under my breath. It had run out of strength. The fight had drained it completely, and now it lay there, helpless, waiting for death to catch up. One of the wolves broke away from the fight, ears perked, eyes locking onto the cub. I raised the rifle. I could end this right now. One shot, one decision. But something inside me held back. The wolves were choosing their fate tonight. Maybe the cub deserved the same. The wolf stalked forward, slow, deliberate. The cub lifted its head weakly, watching death approach. I held my breath, and then the wolf stopped. The fight was over. The lead wolf lay still, blood darkening the snow beneath him. His challenger stood over him, panting hard, his fur matted with crimson streaks. The others had scattered, either wounded or unwilling to challenge the new order. The pack was broken. Only one remained, and he was staring at the cub. I tensed, my finger resting on the trigger. The cub hadn't moved. It was too weak, too far gone. It just lay there, barely breathing, watching the last wolf standing as he stepped closer. The wolf didn't rush. He moved slow, calculating. Every step deliberate, precise. This wasn't a mindless hunter anymore. This was something else. I inhaled, steady, keeping him in my sights. One shot. That's all it would take. But my gut told me to wait. The wolf reached the cub and lowered his head. The cub flinched but didn't run. Couldn't. It had nothing left to give. The wolf sniffed at it, nudging it slightly with his nose. The cub whimpered, barely lifting its head. And then, nothing. No bite. No killing blow. Just silence. The wolf stood over the cub, watching it, considering something I couldn't understand. The snow fell heavier now, covering the blood, the bodies, everything that had happened here. I didn't pull the trigger. Maybe I should have. Maybe I shouldn't. I don't have an answer for you. I only know what I saw. The wolf turned away, just like that. He walked off into the trees, vanishing into the dark. And the cub? I don't know. I didn't stay to find out. I lowered my rifle, took one last look, and walked away. That night, I went home a different man. And to this day, I still ask myself the same question. Who really survived?